Thank you for listening to the monthly technical digest by Ralabs Company. Let's rock it. Well, hello everyone. This is our first podcast like this. So today with you is me, Roman, co-founder of Ralabs, and Volodymyr Automation. Volodymyr knows how to organize quality on a project so that everything works stably. And Yuriy, well, an engineer with many years of experience. Yura, don't even know what your primary or favorite programming language is.
I don't know myself. Generally Ruby, but now I'm writing a lot in Python, plus TypeScript, so it's hard to say.
Anyway, this podcast is our response to the fact that the IT market is changing very, very quickly right now. It's impossible to keep up with everything. Well, even when I was preparing the links for what I'll share today, it seems to me some of them are already outdated. Well, at least a new model came out just recently, Sonnet. Anyway, everything is happening very fast, very dynamically. So we decided to create a place where we'll share some news, novelties that catch each of our eyes. The goal of this podcast is to share knowledge, start some discussion, spark interest, try something new in your projects, in your products. So we're going to try to do this dialogue format. For about 10 to 15 minutes each, everyone has some interesting materials to share that caught their eye over the past month. So it's going to be like that. I'll be today. Let me guys probably start.
Roman, while you were doing the intro, a new model came out, Gemini 3.1 Pro.
Seriously?
Yes.
We were just joking with clients yesterday on a call. We also mentioned to the client that the Sonnet 4.6 model came out. The client was like, when did it come out? And I joked that the Sonnet 4.61 model came out. Right. Okay, let me briefly share what I'll be talking about today. Then I'll pass it to you, Volodymyr, and you, Yura. I'll briefly share the models that caught my eye. Well, I think most of you are familiar with them. Sonnet 4.6, Opus, Claude Codex, and others. I had a chance to look into the benchmarks a bit. Well, I somehow skipped this before. And I discovered some new things for myself that I hadn't noticed before. Well, from the perspective of benchmarks. We also looked at something like Claude Cowork. So I'll tell you a bit about it. We tried using it in the HR team. I'll talk about very briefly Claude Skills. I tried experimenting with them a bit, and it just so happened that in my network, they were mentioned this month. I also wanted to talk about the concept of agentic cloud coding. This is something new that's been happening over the last few months. And I want to share this concept well, and I have a few links that I'd also like to share. There's stuff from Moldbolt, CloudBolt, Crabs, right? And there are also other interesting things I have come across, like some thoughtful ideas and unique perspectives from a few really interesting people I have met recently. I found these thoughts and experiences quite fascinating, and I thought it would be worthwhile to share them with you. So, Volodymyr, what do you think about all of this?
Ruby 4.0.1 is out. And probably while we're talking, 4.0.2 should be released soon. Well, one of our projects has already started moving to the latest version. It'll actually be very interesting because I really want to try it out, see what's what, to see if many of the things they promised actually work that way. I'll also talk about a very interesting new model, WebDriveIO MCP. These are essentially automation requests in natural language. So, for example, please open this page for me, and it writes the code in almost any language for Selenium and so on. I think it's free. I'll talk about KaneAI from LambdaTest. Also, one of our projects is already testing it, trying it out. They're improving it a lot. And it's also a language model that lets you write tests for both mobile apps and browsers. And additionally, save test cases, all your different things. And the new version of Playwright, there are actually a lot of changes there too. I especially liked in this last 1.5.8 that they added a display of charts or these threads, because it shows you exactly which thread has finished its flow and at what time. You can clearly see the sequence of events and take action based on that information. This makes it much easier to understand what is happening in your program since you know precisely when each thread completes its work. So these are now not just simple charts, but full-fledged detailed charts that give you a much better overview of the process. In addition to this, they have also added the ability to run your tests not only on Chromium but also on the full version of Chrome. This means you can now test your code in the actual browser that most people use, making your testing process more accurate and reliable, which is also very cool because essentially the browser is just like the one that people actually use. That's probably all from my side. Yuriy.
Yes, I'd like to share something not new with some new ideas. There's this interesting library called Mermaid. People are paying attention to it. And it even happened that some clients are sending us descriptions of their existing projects with diagrams in this format. And just recently, a sort of alternative option for rendering diagrams came out, which is called Beautiful Mermaid, and it actually makes even nicer, more visually appealing diagrams than the ones I wanted to show. I also want to take a moment to share my experience using the Codex app on macOS over the last 2 weeks.
Oh, cool.
With the Codex 5.3 model, GPT 5.3 Codex, well, OpenAI actually has so many different products and models that are named Codex, it's honestly very easy to get confused about which one is being discussed at any given time.
Cool. Well, let's go then. Let's go. Let me just go ahead and share with you. I'll start first. Good, okay. So the Sonnet model came out, it's more like newer. It came out just a couple of days ago when I was preparing. Actually, literally we're recording on February 19th and it came out on the 17th. It was interesting to look at it. I haven't had a chance yet to work with code, so to speak, and practice deeply. But I wanted to briefly say how Sonnet differs from Opus, that Opus is a heavier model. And according to Anthropic, they claim that it's actually better suited for certain types of scientific research, as well as research and development, and also for some deep financial analysis or other kinds of complex analysis, especially in situations where you might have a large volume of data to work with, right? When you have a concept like open-ended problems, these are problems that don't have a correct answer. And Sonnet is a smaller model for daily tasks, everyday tasks like code refactoring, texts, writing emails, analyzing some small files, something like that. And it was interesting to look at Sonnet at their metrics. And actually, I'll briefly talk more about these benchmarks, because I don't know about you if you've ever really delved into the essence of benchmarks, because I've heard this opinion that models in real tasks behave so differently that benchmarks, in certain situations, to some extent, lose their fundamental essence. Anyway, it was interesting to look at Sonnet. It's here. This is honestly such an interesting thing to look at. You can really see, what actually interests us the most here is these first two benchmarks in particular. The first benchmark, I'll talk about it a bit later, but the first benchmark is how much the model Terminal Bench 2.0, it's how autonomously the model can perform tasks directly in the terminal. That's Claude Code, which we all know. And the second is a benchmark of how much AI can independently find and fix some bug in a small project, like on GitHub, right? And you can see that the gap here isn't very large, so the Opus models are still leading the way there. It's even interesting that for us as developers, the most important benchmark, that Opus 4.6, practically stayed at the same level as 4.5, right? So for us as engineers, 4.6 doesn't really play a role, but where there was a big boost in Sonnet 4.6, you can see it here. It's called Office Tasks, and notice how big the gap is. So what exactly is Office Tasks? I looked into it a bit because I was curious. By the way, I found a PDF here that shows more interesting metrics for us, deeper ones there. I went to check out this benchmark, these office tasks, to see what it's all about. And I learned a bit about it. So it's like, let me show you the graph. It's a rating that shows if a model can be trusted with a real office task, and if we can use the result without edits, right? In simple terms, it shows a more commercial value of the model. So this rating is considered very authoritative. Roughly speaking, it measures how well a model can perform professional work rather than just answering academic type questions, right? This model includes about 1,000 different tasks. They cover about 44 professions and 9 key industries like finance, economics, and all that, right? And Sonnet has become the new leader. Actually, you can see office tasks, the gap here from their previous models. It's a significant gap, and so this is the kind of boost that happened with the Sonnet model, right? I got curious. Oh, I saw this interesting meme where Opus 4.6 is asked to build Opus 5.0 without mistakes, right? I checked the cost, the pricing for Cursor. I use Cursor quite a lot personally. I checked the pricing for these new models like Sonnet and this one, right? The pricing is generally the same as Gemini 3 Pro, but Gemini 3 Pro is probably a bit of a legacy model now since it came out quite a while ago. So, in my opinion, it makes sense to like try using this new model, right? And there was also a model released by OpenAI. And I tried working with GPT 5.3 Codex for a while. Right. I tried working with GPT 5.3 in the benchmarks they show. Let me try to find it. But in the benchmarks, they claim that there is slightly better quality. Here, if you look, the accuracy, the quality is a bit better than in the previous 5.2 Codex. But the biggest boost that happened is the number of output tokens. They claim that this model is like more optimized. So the price hasn't changed, but the biggest change is that it outputs fewer tokens, right? And actually, I looked at these benchmarks. For us as engineers, I think the most interesting one is Terminal Bench. It's how well the model executes code from such a headless editor. Currently, the top models remain between Codex 5.3, Opus, and so on. Sonnet was somewhere a bit lower. I recently looked at the SWE benchmark, which is really all about how well a model can actually fix a real bug in a small GitHub project. And right now, Opus is currently leading the way. I'll come back to this a bit later, by the way. If you remember last year, there was this interesting site, AI-2027, where they tried to predict how AI would develop in 2026 or 2027, right? And there's an interesting reference to these metrics there. And I also looked at... that's it. Those are all the benchmarks I looked at. But I was also interested in this article that caught my eye. It's also quite recent. Turns out Anthropic has a division called Red Dot, anthropic.com. Not sure if you knew. And that's where their cybersecurity research is, like aggressive model testing for vulnerabilities and so on. And Opus, the 4.6 model, a heavy one, after its release, they ran it over various open source projects, and it found about 500 zero-day vulnerabilities, meaning ones that hadn't been discovered before, right? And they emphasized that Opus didn't try to use brute force like other models or approaches did, but instead it analyzed the code logic, it found patterns, and it tried to predict which actions would lead to errors. So it performed a more in-depth analysis, I guess, right? And yeah, the outcome of this article they wrote and released with Opus 4.6 is that you should use the model not just for writing code, but also to analyze your project for potential risks, and other products that are being used. And that reminded me of a certain meme. Okay, the next thing I had that caught my eye and that we've been trying out at our company is it's Claude Skills and Claude Cowork. So Claude Cowork, I don't know if you know or if you've tried the operator from OpenAI. Maybe you've used it before, or have you tried to use Cowork specifically in some way?
I haven't looked into it, but I see you've delved very deeply into all those tests that were out there. Because I just looked and thought, oh, nice, a better number, and oh, this fits my task better. But as for the rest of the details, the description or whatever, I, for one, didn't get into it that deeply. And I see that now most tasks are done automatically. I mean, even security testing. Soon engineers will have to think about what else to do.
Yeah, orchestrating all of it. You know why I started looking into this? Because in January, I got so into AI-assisted programming that I didn't even notice how I burned through about $600 on tokens. So, yeah, and I realized from my own experience that the choice of model, well, as obvious as it might sound, it really affects the price. So I was interested to see if it's worth it, because some models here, if you look, let me go back to this. On cursor pricing, here are some models. Here, for example, Opus 4.6, fast mode. You can see what its cost is for input and output. For output, it's actually $150 per million tokens. So that's, well, a huge gap compared to the others. And you have to understand, when we choose a model and it works, like great and fast, then we're going to pay, well, significantly more for that. Okay, let's look at this Cowork. Cowork is something like an analog, like you might have even seen a demo somewhere where they show, like, you write a prompt, organize the files on my screen, on my desktop, and it, like here, this demo here, and it like magically organizes everything, right? And it looks like a very interesting tool that has access to your computer. By the way, spoiler, there's a separate benchmark that lets models measure how well they can perform actions on your like desktop. That was also interesting. But honestly, I haven't checked for Sonnet and Opus. And we were interested in trying it because we have certain routine, tasks in HR, for example, when we do regular surveys of people. So it was interesting. It was interesting to see if non-technical people could write prompts and it would do, for example, some things inside Google Spreadsheet. So we tried out this tool called Cowork, and then we also tried using the Chrome extension where Claude can actually run inside Chrome and operate strictly on the page you're viewing. And, well, honestly, it's really cool, but we did run into the fact that it works super slowly. I mean, the fact that it works slowly is something you can basically accept, especially if you're not in a rush, but it's definitely something to keep in mind. Like, you can write a good prompt, and then in 6 months, we'll run this repetitive routine again, and we'll have the prompt ready and let it work in the background for, I don't know, half an hour, say. But we also encountered various hallucinations where it takes data from one spreadsheet column and puts it in another, and it all turned into a bit of a back and forth fixing the prompt because it was working quite slowly. To be honest, we just gave up, tried it a few times, gave up, and thought we'd come back to it in maybe 3 months when it works a bit faster. Yeah.
But by the way, speaking of Cowork, I wanted to mention that just last week there was a story making the rounds on Twitter about an engineer who, interestingly enough, decided to clean up his wife's laptop by using Cowork, which is quite an unusual approach, to organize a folder with documents. And Cowork decided that 15 gigabytes of photos weren't necessary, and it just deleted everything.
The wife was probably against that.
The wife was against it, and he was against it, but Cowork was all for it. In the end, he had to write to Apple support so they could tell him how to get into some iCloud backups and pull it all out because it deleted it permanently. That's a very dangerous thing. And in general, anthropic models are known for sometimes being a bit too enthusiastic in what they do. And they do this, well, like whatever happens, happens, as they say.
Yeah. Well, anyway, we actually looked at... Sorry.
But I'm curious, Roman, you say they work slowly. What if you ask them, can you organize this quickly? Will they be faster? Faster, yeah?
That's, it's like asking a model to count from 1 to 100, and it counts to 10 and asks you, should I continue? And you say, continue, don't stop. Or maybe you've heard that meme where they say the Grok model counted to 100 on the first try, but you can't. Anyway, well, we tried this Cowork, very interesting technology, but I don't know, for our tasks, we haven't used it yet. It's interesting that they also have various plugins, like Here are examples for sales teams, for productivity, for marketing. They're like ready-made skills, roughly speaking. But, well, we tried this experiment. Next, Claude Skills. There's probably nothing very new there, although they became popular at the end of 2025. So, for those who don't know, it's like the ability to expand your Claude using a series of markdown files. And what's the difference between Claude Skills and your Claude MD or the cursor rules file? It's that it has a smarter approach. It doesn't get injected or inserted into your prompt every single time, but Claude reads a sort of meta description of your skill, adds it, and then chooses which skill to use. And for those familiar with something like function calling, it's kind of similar. Yeah, anyway. I tried it out, found a few skills, it was interesting. What you, Volodymyr, mentioned at the beginning, here's a skill. You can see how it's described. It's also a markdown file. At the top, we have a name and a description of it. This is what will be injected into every prompt, and Claude will choose whether to run this extra skill or not. This is interesting. There's OWASP security. It describes many vulnerabilities and so on. I tried running it on top of my Next.js project, and basically it highlights which routes or endpoints aren't secured and are publicly accessible. So that was quite interesting. Yeah. I wanted to use it, but this also caught my eye. It was interesting, but I didn't get to it. It's like, what is it? Family genealogy, like searching for your family tree history. I've always been interested in getting into this, but I kept putting it off, thinking I'd have to search archives, make requests, find sources, and so on. So that kind of killed the desire, but there's a skill trained on top of a database. I'll admit, I Googled it, asked if it's just for America or for all countries. It uses some kind of universal archives, and theoretically, it should work for Ukraine and other European countries as well. Yeah, it's an interesting skill. A friend told me about a library called Super Skills. There's a set, like a large set of skills for, like, I've opened the one for brainstorming, which helps you validate some ideas. And here's a large collection. And for those who don't know about awesome lists, there's awesome DevOps, awesome security, awesome JavaScript, anything really. So there's a huge set of skills here. You can really see just how massive this is, how the market has picked it up so quickly, and how well it actually works in practice. Yeah, it's honestly pretty impressive. Anyway, that's basically it for now. Yeah, that's all.
Yes, I'd also like to add.
Go ahead.
Anthropic made the skill format itself as a separate, they basically opened this format for other agents. And now there's this site, Agent Skills, where it's all described and how to write it correctly. And essentially every agent already supports skills. So Codex supports skills and Copilot too. Well, actually, there were images somewhere of all the agents that support this. And now, for example, Skills.sh is also open. This is another large repository of skills from Vercel.
Mm-hmm.
Or skills.
Yeah, skills.
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah.
Cool.
And there are many skills here, analytics too, showing which agents install them. And well, it's quite a big thing. I personally use it on several projects. I have skills there for parsing docx files, which I need for templates. And there are skills that essentially act as a mini DevOps to monitor what's happening on Azure or AWS to diagnose problems. It's very convenient and doesn't lose context. Actually, the way it calls them as needed, well.
Yeah, this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this description, it only knows about the description, and depending on what you want, it can call this skill.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing, Yura. Yeah, that's interesting. Good, let's move on. The next thing that caught my eye, this image never stops being relevant. It never stops being relevant. It's this approach, agentic cloud coding. Last year was called the year of Copilot, when we collaborated with Cursor, Cloud Code, and so on. This year, it seems there's a chance that development might shift to the cloud or into these autonomous development agents. This is a major shift in development. The development paradigm, in my opinion. How does it work? There are several services that I've looked into briefly. Devin, it's been around for a while. Google Jules, it appeared recently, literally at the beginning of 2026. Claude Code was rolled out on the web. Codex 2 web cursor rolled out its agents in the cloud, right? How does it work? They have an interesting concept. There's actually this, maybe you've heard of it, or maybe you haven't. There's this concept, the Ralph Wiggum technique. It's this character. Oh, you can tell who watches The Simpsons. Yuriy.
I know this technique. I've looked into this matter, yeah.
Yeah, there's this technique of Ralph's. Well, let me share, because maybe whoever's listening doesn't know. There's a technique. Ralph Wiggum, he's a character from The Simpsons, you know, the policeman's son. And this technique is named after his, I guess, like, persistence, after his iterativeness, after his kind of brute force approach. I mean, he might not be known for any intellectual actions, but through persistence, he, like, achieves some of his, you know, positive results. And it uses this approach. At the input, we give it some prompt, like, add a page for me, and you describe it. It iteratively, like, tries to execute this, you know, code this part, then it iteratively performs self-validation, then it runs it in the cloud, then it does testing and brings it all the way to a pre-production state. So I want to try this again next month, just to give it another try, you know. So our clients actually suggested to us that, you know, like, that it's a really interesting and unique concept, but there are some concerns about vendor lock-in. That is, if we use Codex on the web, we are accordingly tied to OpenAI models. Yeah, from Google, I mean, there's a tool, but we'll be tied to Gemini models. So here, cursor looks quite interesting, because it most likely it will be cross-model, so we'll be able to use some of our... Yeah, Yuriy, you probably want to add something?
Google Jules isn't available in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
That's a real shame, no chance to try it out. But GitHub has something too. They introduced this agent control center at the last GitHub universe, where you can run several of these agents, like Copilot, Codex, and Cloud Code, right in the cloud. And there's a dashboard where you can monitor everything. I haven't even looked into it yet, but it exists, and it seems quite promising.
Yeah, well, you see, it looks like there's a trend towards this cloud-based programming. At least they're trying to shift it. I'm really curious to try Jules. I'll just try it with a US VPN, and I'll try Cursor. And I have a bit of a hypothesis about the speed, how fast it'll be. Because with Cowork, I saw just how slow it all is. And how much it'll let me, as a human, you know, intervene in the process. Because in my opinion, like, developers should be validating all of this. They need to stay in the loop. Well, we'll see. It's an interesting concept, you see. Yuriy, you also mentioned GitHub Copilot, that they're also, so it's some kind of trend they're launching. Okay, let's move on. And I have a few articles. I'll go through them very quickly, what I found, and then I'll hand it over to you. So yeah, I came across this interesting article from Cursor. It's about their best practices for working with different agents. They provide a pretty practical guideline here on what to do. I think those who work a lot with Cursor are already using this, but nevertheless, for those who don't, I think it'll be interesting to see. They recommend always starting with the planning mode. They recommend adding context. More context, better context. Especially if it's the first prompt. By adding more context, you, like, reduce the chance of hallucinations. They give tips on when to start a new conversation. Yeah, so we have this button here in Cursor. Top right, when we start a new conversation, and they suggest here that either when you start a new feature or when your agent gets confused, you know, those cycles of wait, what about, and so on, and it gets stuck and can loop like that for a long time. Or you finished one part of the work and then you switch, like, to a new mode. About Cloud Skills, about rules, they remind us that we have these features. I haven't had time to look into this yet, but I also see a trend about agents that run for a long time. I want to look into that as well. About visual editing, you know, of images and styles. About code review, the agent-based code review, where the agent basically writes and does the code review for you. I haven't had a chance to look into it yet, but it looks interesting too. And running several agents in parallel is also interesting. So there's that. Next, I came across an article. I won't dwell on it for long. It's from the Pragmatic Engineer. I follow them. They're interesting to read on Substack. It's about how Codex was written in Rust. They had an open source version. Interestingly, Codex, it actually wrote almost 90% of itself, you know. It works under the hood with its own prompts, function calling, and delivers the result. Well, it's an interesting article. I recommend reading it if you're curious about how it's all set up under the hood. So that's Codex. It's open source. Next, I have a few articles about... You can actually take a look at this meme that I found, you know, because it's really quite relevant to what we're talking about. Yeah, we had a race for Claude Modbot. And there's an interesting repository called OpenClaw Design, where they explain in detail the overall architecture, specifically about the process of how this interesting tool was actually written and developed in markdown files. I highly recommend it to anyone interested in architecture topics. They mention Playwright here and an interface like Agent to UI, and how they use Node.js and how they use WebSockets. It's interesting that it doesn't have a single system prompt, but instead it creates a system prompt for every request. About memory, it's interesting to read how the memory is organized there. They support several different types of models. Anyway, these are interesting architecture descriptions. It's quite a trendy tool right now. There were many points regarding its security, but it's interesting to see how it's actually set up in the end. You know, when I found this repository, I thought to myself, so we developers write code, then AI learned on top of that code, then AI created this OpenClaw or MoteBot, and now we're interested to see how AI came up with this architecture, right, on top of what we had written there. Well, anyway, it's interesting to see. Next, I came across an article by Peter, who is actually the guy who developed this MoteBot. He has a few interesting conclusions here. I want to share them. First of all, some interesting observations. He's written a huge number of products. I don't know if you follow him or not, but he's written a massive amount of products. And this OpenClaw was something like his 70th or 100th product that he's released. And it's interesting to just read the reflections and thoughts of someone who has massive experience with vibe coding, AI-assisted coding, or whatever we call it. If you don't mind, I'll read a few points here. It's the idea that when Codex takes a long time and doesn't finish the task in one shot, it already starts to make him have these thoughts about whether he wrote the prompt correctly. So the next one was, he believes it's getting harder and harder to trust benchmarks. You need to understand basically how this model works, how it works for your specific case. That's why benchmarks, especially when the difference is just a few %, are good. But personal experience, like, it has to be there, you know. Codex, he noticed an observation that Opus tries, models like Anthropics, they try to give you an answer as fast as possible, whereas Codex, it tries, on the contrary, to analyze a lot of your code, and then it gives you some answers. So, about the planning mode, an interesting thought that instead of planning, he tries to first have some communication with the agent. He asks the agent how it would implement it, asks it some questions, and this dialogue creates context for the agent itself, and this is basically his alternative to the planning mode. So, interesting approach. So here he thinks that the planning mode is just like a hack, meaning there shouldn't be a planning mode as such. So he shares his agents.md file. It's interesting to go there and take a look. There's a list of his instructions that he uses himself. So, and he shares this file. It was just interesting to go and take a look. Here he shares how he works on several projects in parallel. He says it's mentally difficult, and usually he still focuses on one project primarily, even if he's working on several at once. So he works very iteratively, like on software development, and he writes long prompts, and often he uses voice, meaning this story, maybe you've heard that the first prompt should be very large. So that's what he's like trying to promote. Next, I had another article by an interesting guy, a cult figure, an engineer who worked at Amazon and Google. So what I liked from this article was he's obviously promoting his book here, his view, but what caught my attention was his understanding of like the levels of AI development, so everyone can take a look and understand what level we're at now. So I think I'm personally somewhere around like level 2, so so anyway, an interesting view because now there are many such maturity models. So, and another thing I found interesting here is the Dracula effect. He proposes such a term, the Dracula effect. Here, the message he's talking about is the dependence on artificial intelligence, about how writing code is so, well, interesting that he caught himself, for example, taking a nap during the day. Or he'd be coding until 2 or 3 in the morning because it's hard to stop. Right, and he compares this a bit to the vampire effect with AI, that it can be physically draining. So he actually suggests here, he suggests that if we're coding with the help of AI, we should spend no more than 3 hours a day on it to limit ourselves. Otherwise, it's a very demanding mental task. Yeah. Anyway, it was an interesting article, in my opinion. Yeah.
I'm curious, how do you even code for 3 hours straight with AI? Well, you write a prompt, it generates some code, and you sit there fixing it. Whether with AI or just like fix that thing you wrote, I don't like that code, there's too much code there,
Just shorten it.
refactor it,
Something
something like that.
Yeah. His message, and let me try to explain. I read this whole article. His point is that I have that article somewhere further down, but the point is that there's no such study yet, but there's a hypothesis that people who work more with AI will be more prone to some kind of burnout. So why? Because we offload all the mechanical work to AI and we're left with the complex mental and intellectual tasks. And if you used to work, say Volodya, for 8 hours a day, right? You'd spend some time researching, some time fixing a bug. So you didn't always have this, I don't know, peak load on your brain. Now with AI, I think his position is that you're pushing yourself more intensely, so you really need to balance it and not dive in so intensely.
Come on, it can't fix everything.
Well, yeah.
A lot of things still have to be investigated and fixed manually. I might tell a long story later about how I was adding browsers and it kept fixing things back and forth until I opened the official docs and saw the paths were different.
Yeah, that happens. Okay, let's move on because I'm wrapping up here and handing over to you an interesting article about a benchmark from a company called DX. They do, I think, a quarterly report. They do a lot of reports. And there's a pretty large sample here, around 65,000 engineers. Now, this article was interesting to me through the lens of who uses which tool is popular right now. The message of the article is this: don't measure how many licenses you bought, but measure how many pull requests a developer creates on average. Like, measure what value a person provides using these tools. And they have a comparison here, Cursor, like those who use Cursor daily, they close on average. They start closing about 4 pull requests a day. And there, if I won't show it now, but there's statistics from last year, it increased by about 50%. But those who use, Cursor is like a winner on a short distance, but on a long distance, if you look at Claude, monthly, a person on average closes a larger number of pull requests. And here's even an interesting one, Tab Nina. I was curious to see what kind of editor it is. And it turns out to be an editor focused on enterprise clients, right? And it also has its own market share, Anyway, another message they gave here was like, don't get tied to one tool, do this thing. They suggest a multi-vendor approach, and don't count the number of licenses, count something else, right? And they suggest counting the number of pull requests an engineer creates. Another interesting product caught my eye. It's Entire. It's an open source tool. The problem they solve is that a regular Git commit only shows what changed in the code, but doesn't convey the thought process. This kind of flow of prompts that we send to the artificial intelligence. And they propose a concept like checkpoints, which saves the prompt history, the history of AI decisions in your GitHub repository. Like, it's committed right into your GitHub repository. It allows you to keep this context. Such interactive documentation, iterative documentation of how you arrived at a particular decision. And say in a year, you can open a piece of code and understand why that function appeared, what prompt was used, Well, interesting. I think eventually something like this might appear built in, say, in Claude or Cursor, but it's an interesting hypothesis. So here I wanted to mention AI 2027. That was last year, and I don't know if you've heard of it or not, but it's such a futuristic project. A group of researchers did it, and they tried to describe the scenario of AI development until the year 2027. And they predicted that in 2027 there would be super intelligence, writing code itself, conducting scientific research. Overall, everything will be super great, self-improvement, and all that. The AGI we deserve, And they had these different concepts. They generally said for the beginning of 26th that developers will move from writing code to being architects. And in March 2027, there will be such a superhuman coder. That's artificial intelligence. It will write code better than most programmers. Why did I mention this article? Because I happened to see another article from them. They're actually doing a great job. They did an analysis of their predictions, and they analyzed how much they got right or wrong. Well, cool, right? I mean, not just making some predictions, but they analyzed them. And here's a comparison. And what did they find? That the speed is about 60%. So practically, we're moving twice as slow as they predicted, right? And their opinion is that if the pace, it's here somewhere, if the pace continues, then these deadlines of theirs for super artificial intelligence, it shifts from the end of 2027 to the middle of 2029. But they even write here that we actually think that due to human capital constraints and so on, the speed will drop even further. So realistically, they're saying, let's shift our deadlines to the middle of 2028 or the middle of 2030. This is very interesting because there's this like Einstein effect or something like that, which says that people tend to overestimate something in the long term and underestimate it in the short term. So what we thought would happen to us in 2 years might actually happen in, say, 10 years. Well, interesting. Anyway, I really liked the article's honesty that they didn't just make a prediction, they went back and analyzed it. And they have a deeper analysis here. And actually, this benchmark I mentioned at the beginning for engineers, you can see here that they missed the mark the most with it. So 0.18 is, roughly speaking, 18% of expectations met. Oh, and there's another interesting phrase in that article that stuck with me, that unfortunately, it's hard to be sure what will happen exactly at the end of 2026 or what will happen in 2027, so we'll just have to see. So that's that, right? Yes. And two,
It's an interesting thing, actually, that so many had high expectations for AI, that soon it would be writing code, soon engineers wouldn't be needed, development would be cheaper, but in fact, it's being delayed and not realized, so everyone's expectations are starting to drop constantly. Well, because of the layoffs?
I'd say they're not dropping, but they're probably becoming more realistic.
Maybe. But the timelines are shifting further out. And people were promising, for example, that soon no one would be writing any code manually, but in fact,
It's not, I wouldn't want your message to be taken as if like we can relax. It definitely continues there and so on. Let's not get into that discussion now, but indeed, yes, we have an interesting article where the researchers themselves said that, yes, we're moving slower than we wanted. Okay, let me do the last two. I probably overdid it with the number of articles, but it is what it is. An article from the founder of something called Drupal. It used to be a very popular CMS. You probably remember it. Yuriy just laughed. Yuriy, you don't even know what the last article is yet. Oh, okay. You'll see in a moment. So this is an article from the founder of Drupal. It's a different perspective on how artificial intelligence helps to test and stress test a business model. And he gives an example here of a company like Tailwind. You've probably heard of it, that famous CSS framework with many components. So what was their situation? They were selling their components for $300. There was a set, right? And developers would read the documentation, and then from the documentation, they'd basically buy these components, right? And what happened? Basically, artificial intelligence, based on their documentation, learned to write these components, and consequently, traffic to their site dropped significantly, sales plummeted, and they had some pretty major layoffs. And that's how, well, artificial intelligence stress tested their business model. He mentions here an ethical issue that the AI was trained on the documentation for free, and now the business itself is suffering because of it. Now, he also mentions some interesting terminology here, like AI commoditization, AI commoditized, which is it's anything that can be easily described or specified. It basically becomes a commodity. And he talks about how the value is shifting, that businesses need to look for. They need to find some other value to provide to their customers. And for us engineers, it's a good example to think about what value we provide besides just writing code. That's like domain expertise, validation of product ideas, product stability, testing, and so on, right? Anyway, an interesting article from quite a major product.
Not just Bootstrap. Stack Overflow also suffered. The number of posts is dropping almost to 0.
Yeah, and my last article is about the jQuery library. There used to be this library, well, it's still around, and on January 17th, they released a new version, jQuery 4.0, right? This library turned 20 years old, just so you understand. 20 years. I remember my first attempts at programming, which was about 15 or 16 years ago. And back then, the library was in its prime, how it easily allowed you to do AJAX queries, selectors, work with the page, all that. I mean, so many things. So they turned 20 years old. This year, to mark the occasion, they dedicated the release of the new version, jQuery 4.0.0, right? It's its history. jQuery is, this library once changed the face of the internet. I think you'll agree if I put it that way. And millions of websites are still using it. And I, of course, didn't dive into the release details. I didn't spend time on it, but the fact itself, there were even some pleasant memories of this library, right? Actually, I had 2 more things, but I won't talk about them now. Whoever wants to can check it out, A2UI. It's the Agentic to UI interface developed by Google. This is their propo solution, an attempt to solve the fact that agents won't return HTML, CSS, but they'll return JSON, and then accordingly basically your browser will render it. They say it's going to be cross-browser and so on. Now, interestingly, this moldbot dot, it uses A2UI, so the agent returns this in the form of JSON. Interesting spec, they are open source. You can see what this JSON looks like here. I recommend it to anyone interested. Here's an example of various ones. They even have a library. You can go and see what the code looks like, the actual spec. And I even came across another product, and then I realized it's a product that charges for what Google released for free. So when you type, how do I get to Boston? It returns a Google Maps map to you. So it does what Google released for free, this A2UI interface. It's interesting to see where it goes from here, of course. And one more thing, it's A2A. This is also a protocol from Google. They also open sourced it. They handed it over to the Linux Foundation open source. It describes how agents will interact with each other, and they use things like JSON, JSONRPC there, server-side events, and a lot of stuff like that. So it's also an interesting concept, how agents, their interface proposal, how agents will communicate with each other. That's all. Sorry for going a bit over the 10 minutes. I'm handing it over to you, Volodymyr.
Yeah, thanks. Will you share your screen or should I share mine now?
No, you go ahead.
Well, okay. Super. Well, I'd like to start by talking a bit about the new version of Ruby. They've actually made a lot of changes here. First of all, they changed to a new compiler. The compiler is YJIT. It's written in Rust. So they say the speed will be 10 to 20% faster on this native one. On one project, we synchronized two databases, so we replaced one of their clients with another. They released it as a test, but said it's a stable version, while data is pulled much faster from the database itself. I don't know how it'll be with Ruby written in Rust, but I hope everything will be really cool. Regarding these compiler things, they also added some great refactoring features. If you're interested, you can check them out. They finally added the ability to write conditions on a new line, which was strange that you couldn't do before. And among the key updates is, of course, performance improvement, meaning on simpler things in Rails itself, on Rails there, performance up to 20%, and on more complex ones, it's 5 to 10%. But that's not all. So they've also improved multi-core performance, meaning things will crash less often for various reasons. It works more stably, and generally longer queries or lambdas will fail less frequently due to things like insufficient memory or whatever, so it'll be more predictable in those cases. And the garbage collector, of course, was improved. How could it not be? They improve it in almost every version of Ruby. Now, objects that take up a lot of space will be cleaned up faster. And there are a few other interesting things as well. So if anyone's interested, you can read about it here. I have some very general benchmarks here. So we're specifically interested in Ruby on YJIT. This is the dev version, and I read that in the dev version, performance is significantly lower. So we're only interested in these two columns. So you can see that performance has improved a bit. We won't go into details. They have a full description here. You can check it if needed. They have the entire code written out, how it's tested, so you can see the time and such for each Ruby version. So that's basically it for Ruby. Does anyone want to add anything? Maybe someone's excited to try the new version. Yuriy, as a Ruby expert?
Haven't worked with Ruby in a while. This is very interesting. Ruby on Rust is something interesting because Ruby has always suffered from poor performance. They tried to fix it in version 3, and now they're going further. I'm generally a big fan of Rust and tools built with Rust. Half of my work environment consists of tools like written in Rust. So yeah, I'd like to play around with that. Plus, Ruby and Ruby on Rails work very well with agents. A lot of people are praising it.
Well, yeah, we'll see. Once one of our projects migrates, we'll be able to provide more detailed feedback, plus maybe run some internal benchmarks to see how it works. Because it's a dev version and accordingly, well, I read that the performance was practically non-existent, even worse in some cases. But I hope they've improved everything, so let's see what's next. All right, let's move on to the WebDriveIO MCP Server. This is a very interesting server that allows us to write in natural language, meaning we can make automation requests. And based on these things, we can automate using a browser, like native mobile apps, emulators, and things like that. So here's the full installation guide, and it shows how to manage everything. And interestingly, they actually have an example right here of exactly how to work with these kinds of cases. For example, you might open the app with the necessary permissions, allow all of the permissions, then maybe get the elements you need, press the skip button, or do other things entirely. So here, you're no longer communicating in prompt language, but in a more natural way, just like you talk to a colleague or another engineer simply by telling them exactly what you want to do. They actually have a lot of interesting things here. I'd really like to try it out and see how it works, how it writes all those cases. And well, it looks like a very promising model. The only thing is I see that many different MCPs that write code have already come out, and even many agents that write code. So they're a bit late to the game with this one. But overall, it looks very promising and might even be more useful than other agents. So they're more for Selenium, for other programming languages. And again, there's the same Playwright for JavaScript, TypeScript, and so on. So this should be interesting. You can give it a try. I also wanted to talk about the new version of Playwright, about these charts I mentioned. So here you can see the report by time, like runtime in threads and so on. In threads, I think it was there. They added new features. Also, as I said, specifically a full-fledged Google Chrome was added instead of Chromium, which it used to run on. AP is, of course, performance improvements and so on. So this version, unfortunately, I'm not working with Playwright itself right now, but if there are people who are, you can share your feedback. And I recommend updating to try out the new versions. Again, there's an interesting tool from LambdaTest called KaneAI. One of the projects is already fully testing it. They have a lot of features here. Actually, you can automate not only mobile, but also browser testing. You can write full ones. I mean, step by step, what to do. Like, for example, wait 5 seconds, click this button. Same for a full request. Like, for example, open the app and go to the step where you can say book a visit. And it will analyze the code, see how to get there, and click automatically, writing test cases or checklists or whatever it writes in parallel. And a new feature they added, I'm not sure if it was there before, is a feature that lets you export this into code in any programming language. So it's not just Playwright. Like before, you can also export for Ruby. You can export to other programming languages. So it looks very promising. How does it work? They actually have screenshots here from this article I found. So you write a prompt here and it shows the steps it's taking. So they say it's quite intelligent. It writes out all the steps they've done. So you can go back, you can see what it's done. And if something's not right, you can change it in the process. So there's no more of what we had before, behavior-driven development, where you write code and then check how it works. Here, everything is direct, so you see the result right away. I can scroll a bit more so you can see what other features there are. But basically, these are all the things I wanted to talk about today because quite a bit of time has passed already. And I think this will be enough for a start. If anyone else wants to add anything, please do. Otherwise, I'll hand it over to Yuriy.
Overall, I've definitely been seeing a lot of these agentic browser initiatives lately, more and more often. It's not just from Playwright or Google Chrome MCP. And for example, from Cursor, the guys also made their own browser that works with an agent. And a few more projects, I forgot the name. And this one from browser company Gia, a very interesting name they have, by the way. Also, Atlassian bought them, right? And an extension for Chrome, this one from Anthropic. Claude for Chrome. Interesting trend. An interesting trend where they're trying to make these agents work not just in the terminal, but actually with websites. And I'll actually talk about another idea in this direction in my part, and perhaps I'll elaborate a bit more on that. Let me share my screen.
Thanks, Volodymyr.
Yeah, so as you can see, here is yet another interesting initiative from Google, moving in the same direction as before, WebMCP. This is so browsers don't just take screenshots or read HTML, but actually add certain elements to the markup, declarative ones, so agents know what's happening on the page and could quickly, navigate through it and find the information they need for them. Early preview, but I think just in time for Google I/O or Google Cloud Next. They'll prepare some interesting prototype and there will be some interesting demos of this protocol. Because over the last year, Google has had many interesting initiatives in the direction of specifications.
I'm looking at Google I/O right now on May 19th in 3 months. Well, yeah,
And a month before that, there should be Google Cloud Next, where they talk a bit more about development. Because I/O is just PR, marketing, and Android.
Okay.
Yeah, also speaking of Google, I'm going a bit in a different direction, as you can see by the tabs. Speaking of Google, Google is catching up, by the way, with both Anthropic and OpenAI, catching up slowly. Then these two labs pull ahead a bit. But Gemini CLI is a pretty good product and also quite smart. And it has, they have this interesting thing, extensions. This isn't there. Well, Claude has something similar. But here, for example, extensions are something that packs together MCP, additional prompts, commands, and even these new skills that came out. And I think there are even extensions with hooks. And here you can find many different interesting things, both official and from the community. Even if you don't use Gemini CLI, I recommend just looking at what prompts are used and how people orchestrate these things. Because I see an example of skills for linear, which is this task tracker. So here's a set of skills that allow you to orchestrate linear MCP. meaning to specifically define how linear MCP should be used, which tools to use, and how to describe tickets. And all of this is customized for a team's specific workflow. So there's that. Codex. Codex is currently my main workhorse, the tool I use most often. I switched from the terminal, which I had been using for a while, to Codex. To this app, I've been actively testing it for the last 2 weeks, and the results are very, very good. I really like how it, first of all, shifted the mental load from having several terminal tabs where things are happening to this sidebar where I can just run several processes in different projects. And it just runs, doing its thing, occasionally pinging me when I need to confirm something, and that's how it slowly works. This specific model, Teddy 3 Codex, Roma mentioned these agents that run for a very long time. Well, this is one of those agents, it's built for that. You can't really work with it using the React loop method to put agent calls in a cycle because the agent itself will take a long time to run. A single iteration of such an agent will take a very long time to complete. And Codex has this very interesting feature called automations. You can tell it to, it's not clicking in the demo. You could, for example, say every morning at 9 a.m., please go into these repositories, do a Git pull, review the pull requests, and write me a morning briefing on what I should be doing. Well, something like that. But you can do so many things with these automations. And of course, there's support for skills. There's a small marketplace here from OpenAI. So these are exactly those automations, the ones where tasks just quietly run in the background.
Uh-huh.
And lately, I've actually started coming across Mermaid quite a lot again.
And can I ask about Codex? You know, in Cursor, they have an editor mode and an agent mode, so they have 2 modes. And that first screen you showed, I think, looks a bit like the agent mode we have in Cursor. It's it's called Composer, where you can switch between different agents. It plans the steps itself, searches through files, and you can set up the interface like that. Because I see that you have, sorry, not you, but on the site, the screenshot you're showing here, you have like on the left, you switch between threads, between different agents. In the middle, you have prompting, some conversation there. And on the right, you have the code or changes he made.
It's just a Git client, and these are the changes.
Aha, it's a Git client, yeah. Yeah, well, interesting. To be honest, I haven't worked in agent mode in this one. I guess agent mode is useful if you want to vibe code, like look at the code less. I don't know. Do you agree?
Agent mode is useful if, yeah. Like, this vibe coding, by the way, is also a bit of a meme because many people use it as a slur, well, like some kind of bad word. And now for those, well, let's say for those like me who kind of know the projects we work with, we read that code, we're now using the term agentic engineering. That is, we understand it, we look at the code, we control it. Actually, that's why we have this Git here, so we can see what changes the agent is making. And we can, well, like stop the agent. We can tell him that you did something wrong, check something else. There's a button here to quickly open this project in the IDE and start working, well, old school.
Cool.
So yeah, it's a completely new paradigm. It's not vibe coding where I don't look at the code at all. It's more controlled, like the agent is constantly working under control. I can't trust the agent to start doing all my projects on its own, closing all the tasks.
I agree 100%. Yeah, I agree, yeah. I'm a bit allergic to these vibe coding words already. I agree with you that it already has some negative connotation. So I also, I call it AI assisted development or co-pilots, maybe, I don't know. Like that.
And this agentic engineering, it's the guys from Z. There's this new editor from former GitHub people, and they conducted a small interview with several big names in the industry. And it was called agentic engineering, and now many people use this very term, like AI-assisted engineering, yeah, something like that. But yeah, by the way, there's a lot more to say about Z, very interesting editor with its own integration with all these agents. That's probably for next time. Yeah, and Mermaid? Mermaid. Why did I think of Mermaid? Because we recently did some planning for several integrations, plus a client came to me during a pre-sale with diagrams in Mermaid, and I remembered this product. They actually also have an AI integration where you just describe what you need, although even standard ChatGPT, just the basic one, generates diagrams quite well. So it's very convenient for visualizing some processes, for visualizing architecture, so that like you can even represent the code structure. And I used it at one time even to display relationships in a database to convey the structure, and especially for some migrations from legacy to a new database, it's very convenient to see it all. So, and the developers from a company called Craft made a very interesting thing on top of this. Yeah, on top of this very Mermaid, they use, well, first of all, they gave Mermaid nice styles, so it doesn't look as ugly as it does by default. Plus, they also know how to generate ASCII. This is plain text. And well, like, of course, you can't draw a circle, however, but for some reason, for some people reading this might even work. So, and accordingly, yeah, it's a CLI tool that can like generate PNG files to insert somewhere, because Mermaid generally renders in many places, on GitHub, in Notion, in Obsidian. That's exactly why it's convenient. There are plugins essentially for every editor to render it.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, that's all I have for today.
Super. So I just want to say thanks to everyone out there who listened in. We hope that you found something, or maybe even anything from this that you liked or enjoyed, and we'll try to prepare.
Yeah, we're waiting for your feedback.
Feedback? Great.
Yeah, definitely feedback, yeah.
That's it.
And maybe we'll leave links to these things somewhere. All the links we mentioned to collect them, yeah. As they say, all links are in the description under this video.
Yes, we'll add them, no jokes, but in the description under this video. Well, actually, there will be many links, but yeah, maybe we'll put them in some Notion.
I'm thinking more that people will listen to us in the background, not watch while using AI in code.
I thought about that too. Well, like actually, this is a pilot episode, so you can't account for everything. We'll see. Okay, thanks everyone, and goodbye everyone. Until next time.
See you.